some cheap components together in a way that every woman could do herself. I was particularly interested in women being able to do this since they were the mothers and would have time to do this. Anyway, that was the idea, to enable parents and people in general to understand their own health problems. Once you understand it, you're going to do something about it. I don't think that a parent is going to accept Tegretol and phenobarbital for their child with seizures once they know that the real problem is just, a little roundworm and a little MSG and a little this and that acting together. They're going to clean that child's environment up and clean that child's diet up and cure that seizure problem for their children. Many parents have. Now I want to stop for just a moment and tell you how happy it made me to know that there was a solution to these problems. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious to me at the outset. I had this idea, probably like everybody else, that disease is just something that afflicts humanity, and us more than the animals for some strange reason. And maybe because we live longer, at least that was one of the excuses given. But I just didn't want to accept the idea that it's inevitable. As you get older and sicker, and what with your genes being a little bit bad from somewhere in back of you, that you just had to accept your own illnesses. And anyway, when I got the chance to understand it, I guess there's probably enough of that scientist in everybody, a little bit of the mechanic and a little bit of the gadgeter and so on, so you like to understand things, at least if they affect you and your family. So once I got going on figuring out what the causes was, I thought two things. First of all, nobody's going to believe me, and secondly, what are you going to do about it once you know? So I had quite a job in front of me, but I thought that there's no use keeping this to myself. There's no use taking it to my grave. There's no use trying to make money off it. I had all these advices, but they didn't make as much sense to me as just trying to figure out a way of putting it into your hands. I thought there are parents out there who would build something, even if they had never done it before. And there are parents out there who would study this, even though it was new territory. So, to make a long story short, I put out that thing, and a couple before it, because I thought that, well, people told me, I mean, my friends who had good, logical, and sincere ideas, who told me that nobody was ever going to build this, nobody would ever be interested, and so I was a little bit afraid of writing it down for you. So I thought, cancer, though, everybody is interested in. If there's anything that could galvanize people into action, it would be a family member having cancer. So that had to come first. And now I'll digress a little bit into the theory of it. And I think that is really beyond me, because I don't really understand the theory of it, but as far as I can get. Okay, so if you'll bear with me, I'll try and explain a little bit of the theory. And it comes from just ordinary, simple electronics, the kind that I would have been trained in back in Canada 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And that is that if you have a a little circuit over here that has a particular resonant frequency, and you attach it to something that's generating some kind of energy, then the whole thing will resonate. And I was lucky in finding out that it did. So luck has been about 2/3 of the whole story, and imagination and a little determination the rest. I found that every living thing is like a transmitter, radio transmitter. And we transmit just like your local radio station does. But it's not very strong. At least I haven't found it to be strong. Maybe it's not strong because I don't know how to measure it. But anyway, we radiate. And I didn't want to believe that, because we had always laughed at all these, kooky people out there who talk about radiations and vibrations and frequencies and all that. And they operate pendulums and they do, odd things. So I really didn't want to believe it. But if you can measure it, and it comes out the same time after time after time, and if somebody else can measure it and comes up with the same figures, you have to accept it. So once you accept it, then of course you have to explain it somehow and make sense out of it. And that's the second big leap that you make. First you think it couldn't work, it must be ridiculous, but then after you accept it, you think it's very important. Of course, I was trying to find out what the bandwidth was, where everything was transmitting. And once I knew what the bandwidth was of some little animal, tiny little animal, bacteria or a parasite or something, it didn't take much of an imagination leap to ask, what if I gave this little thing some of the same frequency as it's putting out? What would happen? And there again, I just lucked out, and it seemed to kill the little thing. Well, I thought this must not really be true. You know how we are. If we can't stand the truth, we'll sweep it under something because we just can't stand it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't agree with our notions, and we'd rather just not face it. So I'm just as human as anybody else and all the other professional people out there. If I can't stand something, I'd just sweep it under the carpet until sometime later when I think maybe I can afford to take another little peek at it. So I tried to look at things big enough for me to see. I didn't want to have faith that some little parasite inside of me was dying. I wanted to see this in front of me. So I did that, and it worked, so I just had to accept it. Whether I used a snail or a slug or whatever I used, it does die. So it did make me happy, though, that I wasn't, that everything did stick together and make sense. Not that I could understand it, but at least it was being consistent. And if other people can see the same thing you do, then you're likely to trust yourself a little more. And so I went after every disease I could come across, and of course I was coming across a lot of diseases since I was seeing people all day long. And why was I doing that? Because pretty early on I realized that all my training didn't really amount to a whole lot. It amounted to a bunch of theory with a little bit of experience, a whole lot of faith in the current concepts, but I was lacking a real in-depth understanding of what asthma was about, or what arthritis was really about, and